Roll the Dice by Thomas Cookson, published on the 6th of the 1207. Back in 1988, Doctor Who was in trouble. The show was being driven into the ground by Michael Grade, who invoked ridiculous scheduling that succeeded in alienating much of the popular loyal audience of the show. It's very easy to kill the show off if you want to. Resultantly, the McCoy era was a brand of Doctor Who that was far more niche and less populist than what had gone before. The show had a surreal, clownish, and comical strangeness that seemed to suit its cheap, rough-cut feel as the program was reduced to a kind of minimalism. The greatest show in the galaxy in many ways is the best product of that period. It literally is a circus show with clowns and magic acts. This is a Doctor Who episode that is far closer to outright fantasy than science fiction. The early 80s had seen perhaps the last years of the golden age of British science fiction, with Blake Seven, Sapphire and Steel, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy now over. British science fiction was becoming unpopular or was otherwise being buried as a trend by the dictators of the mainstream. Fantasy fiction, on the other hand, was emerging as the new vogue of role-playing games, Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels, and the never-ending story in Labyrinth. This is my favourite story of the McCoy era. It's often described as the strangest Doctor Who story alongside The Mind Robber. In many ways, it sums up the spirit of Doctor Who for me better than most other stories. It captures, for want of a better word, the soul of Doctor Who. The Doctor and Ace land some miles away from the circus and have to walk a journey there. They come across other eccentric travellers and belligerent locals. Ace picks up a few clues to a murder, and they come across incidental threats that initially function as red herrings for the Doctor's sixth sense of something evil being in the air. Once the incidental threats are beaten, he thinks it is safe to carry on to the circus, seemingly unaware of the evil that awaits him there. The rather plotless journey basically sums up the characters of the Doctor and Ace and how they live as rootless travellers, eager to meet others and with an insatiable fondness for the bizarre and the dangerous. To me, this sums up the soul of Doctor Who just as effectively as the Doctor's speech to the insular Time Lords on the evils of the universe. He has fought alone while they did nothing, or whether Doctor's morality prevents him from destroying the Daleks as he contemplates how, out of their evil must come something good. This episode also plays a part in stripping down some of the layers of Ace's character, and like Survival, is probably one of the more accessible examples of Ace introspection. Ace has always been the rough and hot-headed kind of teenager in need of a parochial and principled character like the Doctor, and this episode is probably one of the first to really explore Ace as being damaged goods of a lot of sadness in her life. She's shown here to have had an unhappy childhood, and there are hints of repressed memories. In her interactions with other characters, it is made gradually clear that she is someone always looking for belonging with people, and a bit too eager to get emotionally attached to people very quickly, that beneath the hard exterior she is actually quite fragile. In a story where most of the people she meets are far more emotionally damaged than she is, some being aggressive, some too wrapped up in self-pity or even suicidal, she finds herself getting hurt quite often. It must be said that here Sophie Aldred pulls off a flawless performance as a more sensitive Ace, showing a particular talent for good facial acting, wearing her good nature on her sleeve and making her infectious and endearing as a character. Also, I must point out that I can't help but see aspects of Susan in Ace, and to me Susan's line in the Dalek invasion of Earth, "I've never felt there was any time or place that I belong to. I've never had any real identity," seems to me like a perfect precedent for Aces sometimes to travel so fast I don't even exist. By the time the series ended, we felt like we knew Ace better than any companion before her. More than that, in an era where Doctor Who's budget was getting sliced, it manages to give us a vast and strange alien world, intense suspense, some genuinely frightening sequences, and all in all, it completely defies conventions of what is possible on TV when Doctor Who is on the cheap even by its own standards. It is the surreal style of the episode that allows it to take massive liberties in its rocky presentation. In a normal piece of television, it would seem really short-sighted for a story that is set in the future to feature modern vehicles and to have characters who look like they stepped out of Safari in the 1930s or a public school from the 1950s, but here it works somehow as naked and recognizable caricatures. Similarly, most TV shows would have had viewers turning off instantly after the leading man, Sylvester McCoy, makes such a poor delivery of the "it's a trap, I've fallen into a trap," after seeing the Doctor and his companions knock the robot guards unconscious with a few light blows from juggling clubs, and yet something about this episode prepares you for the inherently silly and makes those moments wholly appropriate, and still holds your interest of its intrigue and sheer confidence of its momentum. It relies on overblown caricatures. WizKid was of course the stereotypical anorak of Doctor Who fandom. After all, this episode came out in the same era as Spitting Image. In the less popular days of the show, this is how the fanboy was stereotyped. Followers of the show were no longer thought of as the everyman British public who loved watching Tom Baker. There was also Deadbeat, who appears to be mentally gone initially, represents the kind of unreachable misfit of society. His mind seemingly regressed to that of a newborn, only ever speaking in babbling imitation of others. Through the story, we find out how his mind became broken by his encounter with the powerful evil that now controls the circus. He's a lost soul character that we would expect to be killed off being too much baggage at some point, but he survives the story's progression in an unexpected and uplifting manner. Much like the story Kinder, a seemingly lost soul counts for something important in the plot, and in a way which actually makes much of the 70s era of the show seem cold-blooded in the way it frequently treated the hypnotized minions of the evil master as immediately being hopeless corpses and dead weight beyond saviour. There are characters like Nord and WizKid who are merely cartoon caricatures, fitting the stereotypes of punks and geeks alike. Flowerchild and Bellboy, by contrast, are very much the soul and pathos of being the misfit outsiders who have lost their place in the world. They very much represent the hippies of the 1960s, even when it comes to their sad tales of how it was in the old days when they were part of a subculture and had a sense of belonging and could somehow bridge internal conflicts in the group with debate and understanding. The Greatest Show in the Galaxy shows one of the things the McCoy era did best, which is to make some quite ahead of its time social commentary. Specifically, the dialogue of Bellboy seems to very much echo the view that society was once a strong, kind, and cooperative place, but that after the 1960s, things became more conservative and reactionary, and society has become a far meaner place to those who wish to be nonconformist individuals, forcing them to stand alone and be downtrodden and victimized, is the kind of topical content that would show up later in Mike Leigh's masterpiece film Naked. Indeed, the Doctor's later charge at the sadistic gods of Ragnarok, "You're not interested in beginnings, only endings," could almost be a precedent for David Fuller's classic rant in that film about the apathy of modern popular culture. That's the trouble with everybody. You're all so bored. You've had nature explained to you and you're bored with it. You've had the living body explained to you and you're bored with it. You've had the universe explained to you and you're bored with it. So now you just want cheap thrills, and plenty of them. It doesn't matter how tawdry or vacuous they are. Since the popularity of the new series, the media and fandom has often come to describe the old series as an emotionally vapid one by comparison, an attitude that really irks me and brings me to the defensive, especially when I have to deal with obnoxious cliquey posters on the internet who notice my tendency to be critical of the new series and so see fit to be sarky and to tell me what kind of Doctor Who I want, i.e. one that, like the old series, has no emotional impact whatsoever. Of course, the old series had a soul. That's what got me into the series in the first place. Doctor Who is about compassion, morality, and spiritual well-being and health, and about the clash of humanist virtues, good and bad. No one can tell me that either the pathos of the Waterfield family and evil of the Daleks, or the doomed Petra and Greg on the dying parallel world in Inferno, has no emotional impact whatsoever. The Doctor doesn't so much develop as a character, but he changes as a character from one regeneration to another, and each Doctor says much about the period he was written in. The first four Doctors can be seen as a product of the countercultural decades of the 60s and 70s, and Peter Davison and Colin Baker can be seen as portraying contrasting examples of the crisis of masculinity in the 80s. If there's one thing that was big in the late 1980s amongst the youth, it was the role-playing games, like Dungeons & Dragons and the Simon & Schuster adventure game books. If you look at Sylvester McCoy's era, the Tetraps, the colour-coded Daleks, including special weapons variations, the colourful soldiers of Delta and the Bannermen, Morgaine's knights and her ability to conjure chaos demons, the chess pieces in Curse of Fenric, you're seeing the perfect iconography of a role-playing game, right down to the backdrop of outstretched cliffs and castles. In light of the crisis of masculinity that characterised his predecessors, it is worth bearing in mind that participating in role-playing games can be very character-building, a perfect antidote to a young male populace that has lost its sense of identity to feminization and the Generation X theory, and can allow people to experience evolutions in their character and bring out personality traits that they didn't even know they had. In that way, it makes sense that this Doctor, who is playing a role-playing game with us as the toy soldiers, should start as a clumsy, self-deprecating, I think he spelled self-depreciating imbecile, then transforms through the game into a very confident, cunning, manipulative, and formidable force of nature. Likewise, we can see much of what surrounds him as being an effect of the role-playing game. People like Deadbeat can find their old personality spontaneously as they lost it. Davros believes more passionately than ever that he is a god in waiting. Commander Millington is playing the role-playing game by trying to get inside the head of the enemy. By the end of the adventure, he has actually become a Nazi. Fundamentally, Ace represents that defiant youth generation doing the unexpected and making homemade explosives. It is somehow fitting that a stereotypical youth character like Ace should exhibit something so untypical like a pyromaniac side to her. The horror aspect of the story is wonderfully done. As I said, Episode 1 features a long stretch of journey material as the Doctor and Ace travel miles of sand dunes and open roads to get to the circus. But even in these moments, the evil of the circus is felt as a far-reaching run. The bright summer's day and wide stretches of land making the characters feel like they stand out to praying eyes, vulnerable to the far-reaching menace of no escape in sight. The episode is actually very beautiful to look at. In fact, it is gorgeous. But everything about the circus has its savage undercurrent. The malignant-looking clowns are a jarring image of familiar circus iconography, somehow coming to represent irrepressible and utterly predatory sadism. The scenes of the clowns hunting in a jet-black hearse gives the chase a distressing air of inevitability. Likewise, the fluorescent kites become an unnerving sight when we realize that the kites are the eyes of the evil hunting for victims, and also that they have alluring, hypnotic powers of tempting its victims. Once you get into the circus itself, things get rather more terrifying and vivid. People are put into the ring and killed, and the Doctor is selected to be next, and the horrific moments are actually conveyed by what we don't see. In a story where naturalism can meet high farce and shadowy horror, the terror of the situation can be summed up in Captain Cook's sardonic, "No, but you last longer." The program makers had their wrists slapped in the mid-80s for an increase in violent content, and as such they were forced to turn the violence down for most of the McCoy era. To me, the episode says as much on the topic of voyeurism and sadism as the reality TV satire story of Vengeance on Varys did, and says it far better. As a Doctor Who story, Vengeance on Varys was a clever and potent idea on the negative power of the media and violent entertainment, more potent than ever today, but its theme was let down by padding, plotless running around and gratuitous violence. Here, the handling of violence is a lot less messy, and it uses cutaways and the power of suggestion to horrify the audience rather than splattering us with images of blood and burning. Similarly, the chases down corridors don't feel like time-killing, but actually feel relentless and dangerous. The story ultimately stands as Sylvester McCoy's most horrific story, a story in which a lot of people die in nasty ways, in which the nastiest characteristics of people and demons are raised to the fore. It presents us with some of the most frightening sequences in Doctor Who, when Ace is being chased down corridors by robot clowns and is eventually cornered by them in a locked dark room. The scene where Ace is being attacked by the bus conductor is one of the most intense scenes in the old series. I'd say also that this story must have been particularly taken up as an inspiration for surreal black comedy shows such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer and The League of Gentlemen, and boy does this one stand up as being fresh as ever today. Between all the motions of horror, farce, pantomime, and the more soulful moments, the story takes us on many unexpected turns, but concludes by virtue of following up enigmatic plot devices introduced early in the story. This is the gun in Act 1 must be fired by Act 3 clause. The resolution is so ingrained into the early stages of the plot that it is inexplicably but deeply satisfying. I feel this is an incredibly refreshing viewing. It's got great momentum and irresistible gusto, and it's also very multi-layered. Each time I rewatch it, I discover something new about it. With each repeated viewing, it gets better and better. There's much in the new series that seems lacking when compared to this era of the show. The spirit of Doctor Who, the daring and the unconstrained freedom of it. John Nathan Turner might have a reputation as the guy who tried to fix the series when it wasn't broke, but to me he ensured that the spirit of the show was still there, that it was still an adventure series, not footballers' wives. Look at the McCoy title sequence depicting the Big Bang and formation of the galaxy on speed, really bringing home the danger of the universe, the chaos, the chain reactions, and even the very idea that the universe is boiling before us. The John Nathan Turner era kept going no matter what, and it dared to be embarrassing, tacky, violent, but simultaneously it also dared to be strange. It dared to be out there and adventurous and dangerous and to stick out from the norm. It took a knock, but it refused to yield, and it died fighting against its sea of conformity, and it didn't care as long as it stayed true to itself. I'm unfortunately left with the sense that the more conformist new series won't allow itself to be intelligent or challenging anymore because it is so wrapped up in a restricting sense of staying cool.